What's your favourite colour, purple or orange? If that was an easy question for you to answer, great. If you kind of sat there thinking, that's a weird way to ask that question, there's more than two colours, then congrats. You just had a tiny insight into how it feels to be non-binary and to be asked, what's your gender, male or female? This pesky little question just keeps popping up when we're just doing some life admin or filling in a form, maybe getting a haircut, and then bam, there it is. That little constant reminder of how we don't quite fit in. As a non-binary person, it can be really confusing and isolating when people force you to choose between being a boy or a girl. And honestly, as a socially awkward person, I'm just tired of having these awkward encounters with new people who make assumptions based on my body parts. It's like, yo, I'm just trying to join your bank. Why are you basically trying to ask what's in my pants? What's even more exhausting than my own awkward interactions is that trans and non-binary folk everywhere are crying out for better inclusion and visibility across a range of parts of our lives, from our workplaces and our schools to our medical services, our communities, and our media. And we're not getting it. And what this is doing is ultimately proving a barrier to actually addressing deeper-rooted issues for trans folk, like accessing gender-affirming healthcare. Sometimes trans people might really be in a position of crisis or vulnerability or going through something traumatic, whether or not that's related to their gender. What they really need to access the help that they need to get is someone to see them and respect their identity for who they are from the outset. I work in a queer youth service, and I love providing peer support and a safe space for young queer folk who just want to feel respected in their identity. But it's really hard to hear these stories firsthand about how young people don't know where to go in their community to get help because they don't know where they'll feel welcome. Because intake forms at some services often fail to ask about chosen names or pronouns or give space for a non-binary gender, these young people are being left misgendered and dead-named over and over again, which is just piling stress on top of already stressful situations. When you face hostility and erasure and even violence across a range of parts of your life, sometimes it's hard to know where you're going to be physically and psychologically safe. Maybe you know how it feels if you've been made to unexpectedly feel like you don't fit in somewhere, maybe because of your size or your age or your skin color or because you live with a disability. Inclusion and visibility benefits all of us because it helps us to feel seen and safe. Sometimes that extra space on a form, it's not going to change everything, but it might be that extra piece of information that helps communicate something important about our own identity to someone else. And if we can all start off on a better footing, maybe then we can get to addressing the bigger issues. The most recent census in 2021 could have been such a fantastic opportunity to find out how trans people are doing across Australia and really find out where there are gaps where we can direct policy and funding to help us out. Only we missed the opportunity. There's one quick thing to note here before I go further, which is that sex and gender are not the same thing. You can Google it, I promise. And what happened in this census was that the Bureau of Statistics, who runs the survey, basically had to concede that they had mixed up how they'd asked about sex and gender. They asked them sort of together in the one question. It was quite confusing for everyone. And in the end, the way they asked the question was so limiting that no data about trans or gender diverse or intersex people, for that matter, could actually be taken from the results, and everyone got sorted back randomly into male and female. So this was a massive wasted opportunity. This whole situation wasn't just frustrating to me because I was one of those non-binary people sitting behind my computer that night having a little internal gender crisis. It was also really frustrating because at the same time that this was happening on a national level, I was also tits deep in my own research and analysis, which just so happened to be about gender. I'll tell you really quickly how I got there. I know it's a queer trope, but I grew up feeling like I didn't quite fit in. And I wondered why I felt out of place somewhere like a Catholic all-girls school. And so naturally, I fell into studying a degree in psychology. I was trying to, have some insight into my own experiences. And then I took a few gap years, studied abroad, came out a few times, you know how it goes. And that's when I landed out here in Perth to do a master's in sexology. And that's where my research comes in. So you can picture it like a bottle of red wine, it's 2 a.m, I'm just like scrolling through rows and rows of data. I was analysing the results from a survey of hundreds of trans people across Australia that our university had done. And what we were looking at is trans people's experiences in the workplace, specifically with discrimination. And then we looked at their mental health and well-being as a result. The results were really concerning and confronting and indicated to us that trans people are still facing so much discrimination because of their gender identity in the workplace across Australia. Trans folk are still not feeling comfortable or safe in fundamental parts of our lives, like our jobs, and that's not okay. Trans and non-binary folk experience higher rates of mental illness and suicidality than cisgender people. But this isn't because being trans makes you unwell. It's because we're constantly forced to move through a world which limits our expression, or denies it, or rejects it. Through all that heaviness, something that I kept coming back to was that question that we asked up the top of the survey, which was, what is your gender identity? We gave options between male, female, man, woman, trans man, trans woman, non-binary or gender non-conforming. And most importantly, we gave a space at the end that just said, different identity, please list. Can I just say, my little non-binary heart was so filled with joy reading through those answers because I saw my own experience represented and affirmed time and time again, which was so meaningful. But even more than that, I got to see the beauty in diversity, even within the gender diverse community. So many different interpretations of masculinity, femininity, or living entirely outside of any gender binary. And it just got me thinking, what are we missing here? If we know we're here and that we exist, why are we still struggling to take basic steps to be more inclusive? Because gender is ultimately also about how we relate to one another. It really impacts that. And all of this diversity that I had seen is being stifled in the mainstream. When trans people do things to affirm our gender, it can make other people uncomfortable. And that's because we're made uncomfortable by things that are unfamiliar to us. This is because trans people haven't been allowed to become more familiar or visible in the mainstream. If we want to get real about respecting diversity and protecting trans lives, then we need to seriously look at the ways in which we're being structurally excluded. From how the government researches and legislates about us, to how we're treated and seen in our communities, down to how we're treated when we need help. Inclusion matters to everyone and helps us feel safe and seen. When we take small steps to include people and let them express their gender and be true to themselves, we give better help to those who need it and we give better services. When we can't even fathom something as simple as an extra box on a form or asking someone their pronouns, what it's really signaling is a bigger issue that society has with inclusion in general. How can you help us if you can't really see us? We can learn more about gender diversity, and when we do, we can also learn more about our own sense of self and our own identities. When we give people the choice and the opportunity to express themselves, what we're really doing is just enabling ourselves with the tools to make better connections with one another. Thank you.